Welcome to this explainer. If you were to ask the average person on the street to name the absolute greatest empires of the ancient world, you'd almost certainly hear the exact same names every single time. Rome, Persia, China, right? We know their emperors, we've studied their wars, and we've flocked to see their monuments. But today, we are going to uncover a massive historical blind spot. We're looking at a forgotten kingdom that didn't just survive in the shadow of Rome, it literally rivaled it.
Okay, let's just dive right in by looking at a truly shocking quote from a 3rd century religious prophet named Mani. He looked at the entire planet, the whole known world at the time, and stated that there were exactly 4 great kingdoms on Earth. Notice how he placed the kingdom of the Aksumites on the exact same footing as Rome, Persia, and China. This completely shatters our modern kind of Eurocentric view of ancient history. Because to the people actually living in the ancient world, Aksum was an undeniable, towering superpower.
Section 1, the forgotten 4th superpower. To really grasp how this mighty empire rose to power, we gotta look at its dramatic geographic setting. Aksum was located way up in the rugged highlands of East Africa, basically encompassing modern-day Eritrea and northern Ethiopia. It was like a giant natural fortress, perfectly positioned to watch over the Red Sea. Now, long before Aksum, around 1000 BCE, an advanced civilization called the Kingdom of Dempt emerged right in this region. Around 700 BCE, they built the Great Temple of Iha. That's actually the oldest standing building in the region today, and its architectural genius is just wild. We're talking massive limestone blocks that fit together perfectly without a single drop of mortar. Fast forward to 400 BCE, and Dempt slowly dissolved into independent city-states, which basically paved the way for this one small mountain city called Aksum to quietly grow and eventually take the world stage in the 1st century BCE.
Section 2. Ancient World's Wall Street. So as Rome was rapidly expanding, they developed this huge hunger for luxury goods. Spices, silk, gold from India and East Asia, they wanted it all. But there was a catch. The overland Silk Road was controlled by the hostile Persian Empire, and they were charging massive taxes. Well, Aksum totally capitalized on this. They brilliantly controlled the sea routes to bypass those Persian middlemen entirely. The result was the bustling port of Adulis. It was a truly cosmopolitan metropolis. On the export side, Aksum was selling the raw, immense wealth of Africa. I mean, massive amounts of wild elephant ivory, gold dust, and frankincense. And in exchange, they imported top-tier international luxury goods from all over the known world. Delicate Roman glass, Italian olive oil, and fine Indian cotton. So yeah, Aksum was getting incredibly rich.
Section 3, monuments and golden money. Now, how does an ancient empire prove its absolute economic dominance to the rest of the world? You don't just walk around telling people you're rich, right? You show them. And back then, the ultimate flex was minting your very own currency. Think about this. Across the entire globe, only 4 empires had the wealth and organization to mint their own gold: Rome, Persia, the Kushan Empire in India, and Aksum. King Adulis became the first African ruler to mint his own coins around 270 CE. And he brilliantly used Greek inscriptions, which was the international language of trade at the time, basically as global propaganda. Any Roman merchant holding one of those coins knew exactly who was in charge.
But it wasn't just money. The sheer physical scale of their monuments broadcasted their power to anyone who visited. 500 tons. That is the estimated weight of Aksum's largest single stone obelisk, known as the Great Stele. To put that massive number into perspective for you, 500 tons is heavier than a modern Boeing 747 airplane. And this 33-meter-tall monument was carved out of a single, unbroken piece of solid granite.
So how on earth did they do it? Let's walk through this engineering marvel, keeping in mind, of course, they didn't have modern cranes. First, they quarried the granite using this really clever method of soaking wood wedges in water, which expanded and literally split the stone. Then, they moved these 500-ton blocks using wooden rollers and teams of African war elephants. Next, sculptors carved the stelae to look exactly like multi-story palaces. We're talking false doors and row upon row of intricately carved windows. Finally, they erected these giant mortarless stone grave markers using massive earthen ramps and ropes. Talk about a physical announcement that you were entering the territory of a giant.
Section 4. A Christian Revolution.
While Aksum was busy building its empire through trade and these towering monuments, this totally cinematic historical event went down in 316 CE.
A violently hijacked Roman merchant ship on the Red Sea ended up changing the empire's religious destiny forever. Here is how that incredible story unfolded. When hostile tribes attacked the ship, they killed everyone on board except for two young boys, Frumentius and Odysseus. Now, instead of being thrown into a dungeon or something, they were actually gifted to the Aksumite king Ella Amida. And the king was so impressed by their intelligence that Frumentius was eventually made a royal tutor to the young prince Ezana. Frumentius taught the prince about the Christian faith, and they formed this unbreakable bond. So when Ezana finally took the throne, he officially converted to Christianity in 340 CE. What's crazy is that this happened around the exact same time the Roman Empire was going through its own Christian transition. And King Ezana did not keep this a secret. He immediately updated the empire's currency to reflect the new state religion. If you look at coins from the early part of his reign, they feature a pagan crescent moon and disk. But after his conversion, he removed those pagan symbols entirely and replaced them with a clear, prominent Christian cross. This wasn't just some private, personal choice. It was a highly visual, political, and cultural revolution broadcast to the entire world. Under King Ezana, Aksum really reached new heights. He took on this terrifying, awe-inspiring title, Negus-Negest, which translates to the King of Kings. Ezana was a fierce conqueror. He marched his armies west and completely crushed the neighboring kingdom of Kush in modern-day Sudan, a civilization that had literally rivaled Rome for centuries. He then made sure to record these terrifying victories on massive stone slabs known as the Ezana stone, and he had it written in 3 different languages to ensure absolutely everyone understood his absolute power. Section 5. The Byzantine Alliance. All right, let's fast forward a bit to the 6th century. The Western Roman Empire had fallen, but the eastern half, the Byzantine Empire under Justinian, was still kicking. Justinian desperately needed an ally to bypass some new Persian trade blockades. He needed someone with a powerful navy, full control of the Red Sea, and ideally a shared Christian faith. So, in the 530 CE, Justinian sent his ambassador, Nonosus, down to Aksum. And what followed was a meeting of true global equals. Nonosus was utterly stunned by the sheer wealth of the Aksumite court. He wrote down that King Caleb received him standing high up on a gold-plated chariot drawn by 4 massive African elephants. The king was covered head to toe in gold-woven tunics and heavy gold jewelry. Let's be clear, this was not a master meeting a servant. This was Rome pleading for a partnership with a true peer. This Byzantine alliance ultimately led to Aksum becoming a transcontinental military empire. When Christian merchants were facing persecution in Himyar, which is in modern-day Yemen, King Caleb launched a massive naval invasion right across the Red Sea. He used a fleet of hundreds of these totally unique ships, which were constructed entirely without nails. They literally sewed the wooden planks together with ropes. He crushed the Arabian opposition, deployed war elephants in battle overseas, and captured the cities. At this moment in history, Aksum reached the absolute zenith of its power, ruling over territories in both Africa and Asia. Section 6. The Silent Collapse. But as you know, history is fickle. The higher an empire rises, the further it has to fall. But unlike Rome, which had those dramatic, famous sacks by barbarian hordes, Aksum faced a much more tragic, slow decline. It was basically a perfect storm, a death by 1,000 cuts. In the 7th century, the rapid rise of the Islamic caliphates completely encircled and blocked off those lucrative Red Sea trade routes. So Aksum's global wealth just dried up. But it wasn't just external enemies. It was also a highly relatable, self-inflicted environmental collapse. See, to fuel their metal furnaces and build out their massive cities, they chopped down all the local forests. Without the tree roots to hold the earth together, heavy seasonal rains caused severe topsoil erosion. The land could literally no longer feed the people. Famine and plague soon swept through the once great highlands. As the climate changed and their booming economies simply vanished, the empire met a really sad end. The kings made the desperate decision to abandon their glorious stone capital. They retreated deep into the rugged, highly inaccessible mountains of the Ethiopian interior. The empire fragmented, and the whole thing culminated in a legendary 10th century rebellion, led by a non-Christian queen named Gudit. According to the stories, she burned the dying city and chased the last of the kings into hiding. Just like that, the great giant was gone. Section 7. Rediscovering the Lost Giant. Now, while the political empire died, its cultural and architectural legacy absolutely survived. The ancient Ge'ez script is still used to this very day in Ethiopian and Eritrean Orthodox churches. And that incredible mind-blowing engineering genius? That lived on to inspire the jaw-dropping 12th century rock-hewn churches of Lalibela, churches that were carved directly down in a solid underground volcanic rock. And that brings us to the end of our explainer. But I want to leave you with one final, really provocative question. Why do you think empires like Aksum are so often left out of our history books? For centuries, deep Western historical bias essentially assumed that advanced engineering and global trade empires could only exist in Europe or East Asia, which effectively erased African superpowers from our textbooks. But those 500-ton stones of Aksum, they refused to be ignored. They prove that the story of humanity is so much richer and way more diverse than we're often taught. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. I really encourage you to pause, think about that question, and always keep exploring the history we forgot to look for.
Please like and subscribe.